I married my husband thinking I had found solidity. He was calm, successful, and predictable. Everything I thought I needed after years of chaos in my dating life. But as the years passed, that predictability turned into emotional distance. He became someone who lived in the same house but barely acknowledged me unless there was a bill to pay or a plan to discuss. Conversations turned transactional. Intimacy became rare, robotic, and eventually non-existent. I started to feel like a shadow, not a wife. At first I tried to rationalize it. We were getting older, stressed from work, life gets in the way. But deep down, I knew I was yearning for attention, for touch, for conversation that wasn't about chores or errands. I began to envy strangers who held hands in public or whispered to each other over coffee. I had everything I was supposed to want, yet I was empty. When my stepson moved in after a bad breakup, I wasn't thrilled. I expected tension, awkward silences, and boundaries being pushed. But he surprised me. He was quiet, respectful, and even helpful around the house. He cooked sometimes, cleaned up without being asked, and always said thank you. He asked me how I was, and more importantly, he listened when I answered, something my husband hadn't done in years. There was never anything inappropriate. I saw him as a kid, my husband's son from a previous relationship. But the more we talked, the more I started to open up. It was unintentional at first. I'd mention how tired I was, and he'd suggest a show to watch. I'd say dinner felt lonely, and he'd sit with me and make small talk. Nothing serious, but I started looking forward to it, to him, to that tiny piece of attention I got in an otherwise gray, muted life. He began to feel like the only person in the house who saw me. It wasn't just that he was young or kind. It was that he noticed things. When I changed my hair, when I wore something different, he'd compliment it in a way that wasn't flirtatious but sincere. My husband hadn't looked at me like that in years. One evening, I sat in the kitchen alone, eating reheated leftovers. My husband was working late again, and I heard the stepson come in. He smiled, grabbed a fork, and sat across from me without asking. We talked about movies, books, and random topics. I laughed more that night than I had in months, and when he said, "You should laugh more, it suits you," something inside me shifted. I couldn't explain it at the time. It wasn't love, it wasn't lust. It was simply the feeling of being human again, of being noticed. I went to bed that night thinking about him, not in a physical way, but in a way that made me question everything I thought I knew about loyalty, connection, and the boundaries we placed to keep things appropriate. It happened on a Saturday night. My husband had gone to a conference out of town, and the house felt unusually quiet. I was walking past my stepson's room to get a glass of water when I heard a noise, soft at first, then clearer. I paused, unsure if he was on a call or watching something. I wasn't trying to spy, just caught off guard by the volume. Curiosity got the better of me. The door was slightly ajar. I glanced in, intending to say something, but I froze. He was lying on his bed, shirtless, lost in a moment with someone on his phone. A woman's voice echoed softly from his speakers, intimate, breathless. It was obvious what was happening. I should have turned away instantly, but I didn't. For a second too long I stood there, caught in a strange mix of embarrassment and fascination. Then I walked away quietly, quickly. My heart pounded, not just from shock, but from something deeper I didn't want to admit. I went back to my room, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the wall. I was ashamed of what I saw, but more ashamed of the way it made me feel. It wasn't just wrong, it was confusing. The image replayed in my mind, and I hated that it lingered. The next morning I avoided him. I made coffee early and stayed in the garden until he left for the gym, but avoiding him didn't silence my thoughts. I tried to rationalize it. He's a grown man, it was private, I shouldn't have looked. But deep down I was shaken by how my body reacted. Not to what I saw, but to him, to the way his confidence radiated, to the contrast between his presence and my husband's absence. Days passed, and I found myself watching him differently. I noticed the way he walked, how he smelled after a shower, the way his voice dropped when he was tired. I hated myself for it, but it kept happening. He wasn't doing anything unusual, but I was starting to project something onto him. Attention, desire, possibility. It made no sense, and yet I couldn't shake it. What disturbed me most was how alive I felt, not in a healthy, empowered way, but in a reckless, desperate way, like a part of me had been dormant for years and suddenly woke up. I started dressing better around the house, wearing a little makeup even when I had nowhere to go. I told myself it was for me to feel good again, but I knew who I was thinking about. He never mentioned that night. He acted normal, polite, respectful. That made it worse. I found myself wanting him to say something, anything, to give me permission to talk about it, but he didn't, and I was too ashamed to bring it up. Still, every interaction between us now felt charged. The air had shifted, and even in silence, something had undeniably changed. I thought it would fade. I believed if I ignored it long enough, the feelings would die out, but they didn't. They grew quietly and steadily, fed by glances, accidental touches, and unspoken tension. We never addressed what I saw. It became this unacknowledged thread tying us together, tightening with each passing day. One evening it finally snapped. My husband had left for a 2-day work trip. I was home, drained from another argument that ended the way they always did, cold silences and slammed doors. My stepson came home later than usual. He found me sitting in the living room, wine glass half full, eyes red from frustration. He didn't ask questions, just sat next to me, close but not too close. Minutes passed without words, then he said quietly, "You saw me that night, didn't you?" I didn't answer, but I didn't deny it. My silence was confirmation enough. He didn't flinch, didn't smirk, didn't make it awkward. Instead, he said, "You haven't looked at me the same since." Something about his tone, soft, steady, almost protective, disarmed me. I felt the walls inside me crumble. I tried to redirect the conversation, to retreat, but he reached out and touched my hand. That single touch held more warmth than I'd felt from my husband in months, maybe years. I told him this was wrong. He agreed, but neither of us moved. I told him it couldn't happen, he said. Then why are we both still here? I couldn't answer. I couldn't pretend anymore. The space between right and wrong collapsed, and the craving for connection eclipsed everything else. What happened next wasn't planned, it wasn't seduction, it was surrender. We didn't speak, we didn't need to. Years of loneliness, resentment, and unmet needs crashed into a single, irreversible moment. I should have stopped. I should have thought of the consequences, but all I thought about was how present I finally felt, how wanted, how alive. Afterward there was no giddiness, no satisfaction, just silence. He sat next to me, eyes searching mine for some kind of reaction. I couldn't meet his gaze. I stood, said I needed air, and walked into the kitchen, hands trembling. Everything had changed in less than an hour. When I finally looked in the mirror that night, I didn't recognize myself. Not because I felt guilty, but because I didn't feel guilt at all, at least not yet. I felt relief, a dark, confusing kind of relief, like a thirst had been quenched after years of pretending I wasn't parched. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed listening to the clock tick, thinking about what I'd done, what we'd done, and how there was no going back. I knew the line had been crossed. It wasn't just infidelity, it was betrayal of something deeper. Trust, roles, boundaries. And yet, a part of me didn't want to undo it. A part of me had waited far too long to feel something again. The morning after was quiet, almost too normal. I woke up before him, made coffee, and sat alone at the table, unsure of what I was supposed to feel. My husband would be back that evening, and nothing about my life felt familiar anymore. When my stepson came into the kitchen, he looked at me with cautious eyes, like he didn't know which version of me he'd be facing. We didn't speak much. He asked if I was okay, and I nodded, avoiding his gaze. Everything between us was raw and exposed. There was no plan, no understanding of what came next. I went about my day pretending nothing had happened, but internally I was unraveling. Every sound, every movement felt amplified, like my senses were heightened from the guilt I refused to admit. That evening, when my husband returned, I hugged him like nothing was wrong. He didn't notice anything different. He never did. He talked about his trip, about hotel food and boring meetings, while I sat across from him thinking about how I had shattered the last piece of our marriage, and the worst part was, I didn't even regret it fully. I just felt disconnected, like I was playing a role that no longer fit. My stepson kept his distance after that. The easy conversations, the shared laughter, the innocent moments, we both avoided them. He became quiet, like he was afraid to do or say the wrong thing. I saw the confusion in his eyes, the way he looked for signs of how I felt, but I couldn't give him answers. I didn't know them myself. Days turned into weeks. He spent more time out of the house, found reasons to stay away, and eventually mentioned moving back to his mom's place. I didn't try to stop him. I just said I understood. When the day came and he packed his things, we didn't have a big talk, no closure, just a glance at the door before he walked out and said, "Take care of yourself." I stood there alone, knowing I had changed something in him too, not just with the act, but with the confusion I left behind. I had broken the rules and offered no meaning to the mess. I told myself it was a mistake, but the truth is, part of me didn't believe that. Part of me still craved what that night gave me. Connection, attention, warmth. Now I go through the motions. I smile when I have to, I play the role of the wife, the woman who keeps it together, but deep inside, there's a silence I can't shake, a lingering question I can't answer. Was I just lonely, or did I trade years of neglect for a moment of clarity? I betrayed my marriage, my role, my own sense of right and wrong, and yet I'm still not sure if I would take it back.